Interesting.
Now, if I was king, I would say, let's make those available to everybody so that they could figure out their own risk and make their own decisions about vaccination. But in their infinite wisdom, the government has not decided to take that path at this point in time. But it could be possible, and you can inform yourself about your risks. It's not easy. Your risks of disease, a lot of that you would have to be somebody like me that's comfortable diving into the primary literature.
Sure.
Or you could rely on your doctor, who's probably going to say, just take the jab and shut up. Because they don't have any time, because they're not budgeted for doing that. They're budgeted to give you a jab in the shoulder and tell you to move on. And to really make your own personal assessment of risk-benefit ratio, you have to understand what the risks are. And again, in their wisdom, the government has decided on the noble lie strategy of denying that there are risks, or only disclosing risks if they're absolutely forced to, and just insisting that everybody get the jab, and putting out a whole huge army of deploying amazingly powerful tools to convince the population that they should take the jab. But those old gray hairs like me that have been through this and through multiple outbreaks say, yeah, but if the data show that if you're an infant through about the age of 40, this is increasingly clear even with the limited data we have in understanding of the risks of these genetic vaccines, the adenovirus vectors plus the RNAs. The risks for newborns through about age 40 are at the margins or upside down for taking vaccine versus your risk of getting COVID, severe COVID, to the point where you're hospitalized or you die. So many of us are saying, no, this has got to stop. We can't, especially these are still experimental products. And so this gets into the bioethics, the fundamental bioethics that go back to the Nuremberg trials and the Helsinki Accords and the Belmont Report here in the States, and it's codified in federal law as the common rule, all say that for an experimental product, there must be full and complete disclosure of risks. Those risks have to be comprehended and comprehensible, so that in the States that translates to 8th grade language.
Right.
And the person has to accept the experimental product of their own accord by free choice, free will. They cannot be coerced, and they cannot be compelled through incentives like lottery tickets or shotguns or whatever else, or ice cream for the adolescents. And in the case of adolescents and infants and children, we define the age of consent as 18, and so by definition, they cannot provide informed consent, and their parents or their guardians have to. So those are the rules. And we have decided to, the government has decided to disregard those rules, even though they're in federal law, and put out all this information and censorship to try to keep people from even discussing things, even scientists discussing risks or other aspects of all this. So don't put this up on YouTube, you may get deleted. So in terms of the specific vaccines, in my opinion, I've been asked this question countless times, as you might imagine. And I have deep knowledge of the adenoviral vectored technology. The thing about all of this is that the FDA did not apply the gene therapy regulatory checklist to these products. They only applied the vaccine checklist. And so they didn't require that the developers do genotoxicity or full reproductive toxicity, and they didn't require them to characterize how much of the protein insert in the gene therapy technology, in all cases, this is the viral spike protein, with 2 amino acid modifications that were designed to make it more immunogenic, not designed to make it more safe. So that's a misconception that Reuters has promoted. They were not required to characterize where this protein was being expressed, for how long, in what cell types, and at what level. So none of that is known.
Is that frightening to you?
It's concerning, frightening. I took Moderna twice. I probably shouldn't have. I did have adverse events from that on top of my long COVID. I developed grade 3 hypertension, restless leg syndrome, and other symptoms that I hadn't had before.
Interesting.
So the hypertension is one of the adverse events that's associated in some people. And I'm not the 135-pound young buck that I once was anymore.
Right.
So I have to blame myself for not being in perfect shape also. But just knocking off the adenoviral vectors in the States, that's the J&J product. Adenoviral vectors were designed for long expression of high levels of protein for gene therapy purposes. And so I infer, in the absence of data, because they weren't required to characterize this, that there will be substantial amounts of protein transgene, spike protein, produced from the adenoviral vectors for long periods of time with those vaccines. I have suggested generally that people avoid those vaccines for that reason.
Okay.
Now, talking about the RNA ones, there's only 2 on the license, or they're not licensed, I apologize. These are all under emergency use authorization, so they remain experimental.
Yep.
Of the 2 mRNA vaccines, one has Pfizer and Moderna. Remember that Moderna is a company that was created by DARPA, and the vaccine itself was engineered by the Vaccine Research Center at NIH. So it's good to know that Dr. Fauci's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Disease receives substantial royalty revenue from Moderna, as do 6 different staffers who have government salaries. They get supplemented $150,000 a year for royalties from their work that they did in engineering what we now call the Moderna vaccine.
Wow.
The Pfizer vaccine is based on BioNTech, which was similarly sponsored by the German government. Okay, so those, it's good to know that those are government-sponsored companies.
Right.